Welcome back to Grim Advice with Gretta Myers. You've entered the Grimoire with 2 M's. Let's turn some pages together. So, I am far more disappointed in myself than you could ever be disappointed in me for not getting a video out yesterday. And it just did not work out because by the time I was done doing what I needed to do, yesterday it was like 11:30 at night, and this is a 5-page story, so it just was not going to happen. And I'm more important than the story, and sleep is a good thing. Sometimes. So, I'm going to get the full slate out of this week as normal. I will just, no Saturday special, just do another episode as I've done in the past. So, without further ado, the King of the Golden Mountain. There was a certain merchant who had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were both young and could not walk, and 2 richly laden ships of his sailed forth to sea with all his property on board, and just as he was expecting to win much money by them, news came that they had gone to the bottom, and now instead of being a rich man, he was a poor one, and had nothing left but one field outside the town. In order to drive his misfortune a little out of his thoughts, he went out to his field, and he was just walking forwards and backwards in it. A little black mannikin stood suddenly by his side, and asked why he was so sad, and what he was taking so much to heart. Then said the merchant, "If you could help me, I would willingly tell you." "Who knows?" replied the black dwarf. "Perhaps I could help you." Then the merchant told him that all he had possessed had gone to the bottom of the sea, and he had nothing left but this field. "Do not trouble yourself," said the dwarf, "if you will promise to give me the first thing that rubs itself against your leg when you are at home again, and to bring it here to this place in 12 years' time, you shall have as much money as you will." The merchant thought, "What can that be but my dog?" and did not remember his little boy, so he said yes, gave the black man a written and sealed promise, and went home. When he reached home, his little boy was so delighted that he held by a bench, tottered up to him and seized him fast by the legs. The father was shocked, for he remembered his promise, and now knew what he had pledged himself to do. As, however, he still found no money in his chest, he thought the dwarf had only been jesting. A month afterwards he went up to the attic, intending to gather some old tin to sell it, and saw a great heap of money lying. There he was happy again, made purchases, and became a greater merchant than before, and felt that this world was well governed. In the meantime the boy grew tall, and at the same time sharp and clever, but the nearer the 12th year approached, the more anxious the merchant grew, so that his distress might be seen in his face. One day his son asked what ailed him, but the father would not say. The boy, however, persisted so long that at last he told him that without being aware of what he was doing, he had promised him to a black dwarf, and had received much money for doing so. He said likewise that he had set his hand and seal to this, and that now when 12 years had gone by, he would have to give him up. Then said the son, "O father, do not be uneasy, all will go well. The black man has no power over me." The son had himself blessed by the priest, and when the time came, father and son went together to the field, and the son made a circle and placed himself inside it with his father. Then came the black dwarf and said to the old man, "Have you brought with you that which you promised me?" He was silent, but the son asked, "What do you want here?" Then said the black dwarf, "I have to speak with your father, and not with you." The son replied, "You have betrayed and misled my father. Give back the writing." "No," said the black dwarf, "I will not give up my rights." They spoke together for a long time after this, but at last they agreed that the son, as he did not belong to the enemy of mankind, nor did he to his father, should seat himself in a small boat which should lie on water which was flowing away from them, and that the father should push it off with his own foot, and then the son should remain given up to the water. So he took leave of his father, placed himself in a little boat, and the father had to push it off with his own foot. The boat capsized so that the keel was uppermost, and the father believed his son was lost, and went home and mourned for him. The boat, however, did not sink, but floated quietly away, and the boy sat safely inside it, and it floated thus for a long time, till at last it stopped by an unknown shore. Then he landed and saw a beautiful castle before him, and set out to go to it. But when he entered, he found that it was bewitched. He went through every room, but all were empty, until he reached the last, where a snake lay coiled in a ring. The snake, however, was an enchanted maiden who rejoiced to see him, and said, "Have you come, O my deliverer? I have already waited 12 years for you. This kingdom is bewitched, and you must set it free." "How can I do that?" he inquired. "Tonight come 12 black men, covered with chains, who will ask what you are doing here. Keep silent. Give them no answer, and let them do what they will with you. They will torment you, beat you, stab you. Let everything pass, only do not speak. At 12 o'clock they must go away again. On the second night 12 others will come. On the third 24, who will cut off your head. But at 12 o'clock their power will be over. And then if you have endured all, and have not spoken the slightest word, I shall be released. I will come to you, and will have in a bottle some of the water of life. I will rub you with that, and then you will come to life again and be as healthy as before." Then said he, "I will gladly set you free." And everything happened just as she had said. The black man could not force a single word from him, and on the third night the snake became a beautiful princess, who came with the water of life and brought him back to life again. So she threw herself into his arms and kissed him, and there was joy and gladness in the whole castle. After this their marriage was celebrated, and he was king of the Golden Mountain. They lived very happily together, and the queen bore a fine boy. 8 years had already gone by, and then the king thought of his father. His heart was moved, and he wished to visit him. The queen, however, would not let him go away, and said, "I know beforehand that it will cause my unhappiness." But he suffered her to have no rest until she consented. At their parting she gave him a wishing ring, and said, "Take this ring and put it on your finger, and then you will immediately be transported wherever you would be. Only you must promise me not to use it in wishing me away from this place with your father." That he promised her, put the ring on his finger, and wished himself at home just outside the town where his father lived. Instantly he found himself there, and made for the town. And when he came to the gate, the sentries would not let him in, because he wore such strange and yet such rich and magnificent clothing. Then he went to a hill where a shepherd was watching his sheep, changed clothes with him, put on his old shepherd's coat, and then entered the town without hindrance. When he came to his father, he made himself known to him, but he did not at all believe that the shepherd was his son, and said he certainly had had a son, but that he was dead long ago. However, as he saw he was a poor needy shepherd, he would give him something to eat. Then the shepherd said to his parents, "I am verily your son. Do you know of no mark on my body but which you could recognize me?" "Yes," said his mother, "our son had a raspberry mark under his right arm." He slipped back his shirt, and they saw the raspberry under his right arm, and no longer doubted that he was their son. Then he told them that he was the king of the Golden Mountain, and a king's daughter was his wife, and that they had a fine son of 7 years old. Then said the father, "That is certainly not true. It is a fine kind of king who goes about in a ragged shepherd's clothes." At this, the son fell in a passion, and without thinking of his promise, turned his ring round, and wished both his wife and child with him. They were there in a second, but the queen wept and reproached him, and said that he had broken his word, and had brought misfortune upon her. He said, "I have done it thoughtlessly, and not without evil intention," and tried to calm her, but she pretended to believe this, but she had mischief in her mind. Then he led her out of the town into the field, and showed her the stream where the little boat had been pushed off. Then he said, "I am tired, sit down, I will sleep a while on your lap." Then he laid his head on her lap and fell asleep. When he was asleep, she first drew the ring from his finger, and she drew away the foot from which was under him, leaving only the slipper behind her. And he took her child in her arms and wished herself back in her own kingdom. When he awoke, there he lay quite deserted, and his wife and child were gone, and so was the ring from his finger, only the slipper was still there as a token. "Home to your parents you cannot return," thought he. "They would say that you were a wizard. You must be off and walk on until you arrive in your own kingdom." So he went away, and came at length to a hill by which 3 giants were standing, disputing with each other because they did not know how to divide their father's property. When they saw him passing by, they called to him and said, little men had quick wits, that he was to divide their inheritance for them. The inheritance, however, consisted of a sword, which had this property, that if anyone took it in his hand and said, "All heads off but mine," every head would lie on the ground. Secondly, a cloak, which would make anyone who put it on invisible, and thirdly, a pair of boots, which could transport the wearer to any place he wished in a moment. He said, "Give me the 3 things, that I may see if they are still in good condition." And they gave him the cloak, and when he had put it on, he was invisible and changed into a fly. Then he resumed his own form and said, "The cloak is a good one, now give me the sword." And they said, "No, we will not give you that. If you were to say, 'All heads off but mine,' all our heads would be off, and you alone would be left with yours." Nevertheless, they gave it to him with the condition that he was only to try it against a tree. Then he did, and the sword cut into the trunk of a tree as if it had been a blade of straw. Then he wanted to have the boots likewise, but they said, "No, we will not give them. If you had them on your feet, or to wish yourself at the top of the hill, we would be left down here with nothing." "Oh no," said he, "I will not do that." So they gave him the boots as well. And now when he had got all these things, he thought of nothing but his wife and child, and said as though to himself, "Oh, if I were but on the golden mountain." And in the same moment he vanished from the sight of the giants, and thus their inheritance was divided. When he was near his palace, he heard sounds of joy and fiddles and flutes. The people told him that his wife was celebrating her wedding with another. Then he fell into a rage and said, "False woman, she betrayed and deserted me while I was asleep." So he put on his cloak and, unseen by all, went into the palace. Then he entered the dining hall. When he entered the dining hall, a great table was spread with delicious food, and the guests were eating and drinking and laughing and jesting. She sat on a royal seat in the middle of them, in splendid apparel, with a crown on her head. He placed himself behind her, and no one saw him. When she put a piece of meat on a plate for herself, he took it away and ate it. When she poured out a glass of wine for herself, he took it away and drank it. She was always helping herself to something, and yet she never got anything, for plate and glass disappeared immediately. Then, dismayed and ashamed, she arose and went to her chamber and wept. But he followed her there. She said, "What, has the devil power over me, or did my deliverer never come?" Then he struck her in the face and said, "Did your deliverer never come? It is he who has you in his power, you traitor. Have I deserved this from you?" Then he made himself visible, went into the hall, and cried, "The wedding is at an end, the true king is returned." The king's princes and counselors who were assembled there ridiculed and mocked him, but he did not trouble to answer them, and said, "Will you go away or not?" At this they tried to seize him and pressed upon him. But he drew his sword and said, "All heads off but mine," and the heads rolled on the ground, and he alone was master and once more king of the Golden Mountain. It honestly kind of reminds me of the Odyssey. You know? He comes home and it's like, well, she has a bunch of suitors, so he murders them all. You know. Okay. First off, again, if you're making a deal with a less than reputable person, remember all your assets, including your children, because this is a common theme in Grimm fairy tales, that they accidentally, whoops, traded away their child. How unfortunate. Okay. I really like how the snake, wow, how appropriate, she was a snake princess. Snake. She explicitly told him, "Yeah, it's gonna suck and your head's gonna be cut off, but then I'll revive you and it'll be fine." Like, she was very upfront and honest, and be like, "Please, will you still help me do this, even though it's gonna be really hard and also suck?" So I guess just be upfront and honest. That's a good way to go. Also, okay, I did not like him. I didn't. He honestly was not a likable character, in my opinion, and did not do things that were good or valiant or heroic. Okay, is the wife in the wrong? Yes. And he did break his promise to her, though, so she's understandably upset. And while what she did and trying to get remarried was not necessarily a good or reputable thing, moving on from someone that you feel has betrayed you, kind of more understandable. And then that person shows up and kind of slaps you and is like, "Hey, I'm back, what the heck?" That's kind of not chill. Like, you can see it from his perspective, and that's the way the story is told, as he's the hero, but you can also see it from the other people's perspective. So, perspective is a good thing, and don't trust snakes. Okay. Alright, my gremlins. Thank you for joining us for a happily ever after, or not so happily ever after. That's up for you to decide, and what you decide is valid. Because you're valid. You are. Either way, this is the end for this episode, so tune in later. We can learn more and turn new pages together.